Finger painting? That's what he asked, like my soul was smeared in cheap acrylic. Alexander Sterling, whose suits cost more than my life. The vintage Bordeaux was already pooling on the tablecloth, a crimson stain mocking my minimum wage existence. It wasn't the money, it was the contempt. Nobody talks to him like that, but I couldn't just swallow it. No. The word hung in the air, thick as injustice. Now I'm jobless, penniless almost. What he doesn't know? He just handed me the brush to paint his world a brand new color, a color he won't see coming. One night in the most exclusive restaurant in Malibu, a single word of defiance, no, ignites a firestorm. It cost her a job. But what happened next is something no one could have predicted. It's a story about grief art, and a gesture so audacious it would change both of their lives forever. The air in Aurelia, perched on the edge of Malibu's coastline, was thick with the scent of money and saffron. Floor-to-ceiling windows presented a panoramic masterpiece of the sun, bleeding into the Pacific Ocean, a sight so perfect it almost looked fake. Inside the clinking of Christoph silver against Bernardo porcelain was the restaurant's gentle heartbeat. For the patrons, this was a Tuesday. For Clara Ara Evans, it was another 6-hour shift of balancing her life on a tray. Clara Ara, at 24, had the kind of quiet grace that often made her invisible, a desirable trait in the world of elite service. She moved between tables with an artist's economy of motion, her mind often miles away, mixing shades of cerulean and cadmium yellow on a mental canvas. Waitressing at Aurelia paid the exorbitant rent for her tiny North Hollywood apartment, and more importantly, funded the art supplies that were her true lifeblood. Her small studio space was her sanctuary, the one place where she wasn't invisible, but a creator. Tonight, the coveted corner table, the one with the unobstructed sunset view, was occupied by the kind of man who didn't just command a room, but owned the very air in it. Alexander Sterling. Even if you didn't know his name, you knew his type. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, dark and severe. His watch a Patek Philippe that cost more than Clara Ara's art school degree. He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a global private equity firm that devoured companies with the casual lethality of a great white shark. With him were two younger men, Sickens in training, who laughed a little too loudly at his dry, cutting remarks. Clara Ara's designated section, her bad luck. For the first hour, the service was routine. She recited the specials with practiced dispassion, described the wine pairings with an expertise that belied her own preference for cheap beer, and endured the casual way they dismissed her with a wave of a hand. Alexander Sterling barely looked at her, his gaze either fixed on his phone or directed out at the ocean, his expression flinty and unreadable. The trouble started with the spilled wine. One of the younger men, trying too hard to impress his boss, gesticulated wildly while telling a story and knocked over a glass of vintage Bordeaux. The crimson liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth like a crime scene. Clumsy, Sterling muttered, not looking up from his phone. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a slap. The young man flushed with shame. Clara Ara was there in an instant. "It's no problem at all, sir. Let me take care of that." She worked efficiently, her movements swift and precise. As she was carefully gathering the stained linen, Sterling finally looked up, his steel gray eyes landing on her for the first time. He noticed a small, faint smudge of ultramarine blue paint on her wrist just below her cuff. "What's that?" he asked, his voice laced with a bored clinical curiosity. Clara Ara paused. "I'm sorry, sir." He gestured with his chin towards her wrist. "The paint. Do you spend your days finger painting?" The two younger men snickered. Clara Ara felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks. It was the sting of dismissal, the casual belittling of the one thing that defined her. "I'm a painter, sir," she said, her voice tight but level. Sterling gave a short, humorless laugh. He leaned back, surveying her as if she were a curious specimen. A painter, of course. One of those. "Let me guess, you paint sunsets and seagulls. Sell them on the pier for $50 to tourists." "My art is not for sale on the pier," she said, her composure beginning to fray. "No. So it's a serious pursuit, a hobby to pass the time for bored girls waiting for a husband to pay the bills. He continued, his words dripping with condescension. He picked up his water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving hers. Tell me, what do you paint than abstract nonsense that requires a long-winded explanation no one actually understands? That was it. He hadn't just insulted her. He had taken a wrecking ball to the very foundation of her identity. He had reduced her passion, her struggle, her soul-bearing work into a cheap gendered cliché. Every pre-dawn hour she spent in her studio, every dollar she scraped together for a new tube of oil paint, every sacrifice she made, all of it trivialized in a single careless breath. Something inside Clara snapped. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was a quiet, profound shift. The practiced difference of the waitress fell away. In the artist, the proud, fiercely protective creator took its place. She straightened up to her full height, her tray held at her side. She looked Alexander Sterling directly in the eye. Her own eyes, a warm hazel, were now as cold and hard as his. "I paint what matters to me," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the ambient chatter. "And my work, my soul, is not a topic for your dinner table amusement." A stunned silence fell over the table. The two associates looked from Clara to their boss, their faces frozen in disbelief. Sterling's faint, mocking smile vanished. No one spoke to him like that ever. He placed his glass down with a soft click. "What did you just say to me?" I said. Clara repeated, enunciating each word with chilling clarity. "That you are being disrespectful and I will not continue to serve this table." She turned to one of her colleagues, a junior waiter named Leo, who was staring with wide, terrified eyes. "Lo, please inform my manager, Marco, that table 12 requires a new server." Without another glance at the billionaire, she turned on her heel and walked away, her back ramrod straight. She could feel his stare burning into her, a tangible force of pure distilled fury. She didn't stop, didn't look back. She walked directly to the service station, placed her tray down with a hand that was now trembling, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Within a minute, Marco, the restaurant's impeccably dressed and perpetually anxious manager, was at her side. Clara. What in God's name was that? "Do you know who that is?" he hissed, his face pale. "He's a guest who was insulting me personally," she replied, her voice shaking but firm. "He's Alexander Sterling. He could buy this entire block and turn it into his personal parking lot. You don't talk to him. You just serve him. You apologize now." "No." Clara said the word tasting like freedom and terror. "I will not apologize for demanding basic respect." Marco looked as if she had just slapped him. He glanced nervously toward Sterling's table. The billionaire was now on his feet, speaking quietly but menacingly to his associates. He looked over at Marco and Clara, his expression a mask of cold rage. Marco's decision was instantaneous. He was a man who understood power dynamics above all else. "You're fired, Clara," he said, the words rushing out. "Get your things. You are done here. Go now before I have security escort you out." The finality of it hit her like a physical blow. Fired, just like that. For a moment, the world tilted, the weight of her rent, her bills, her art supplies crashing down on her. She looked past Marco to table 12. Alexander Sterling was watching her, his face impassive, victorious. He had swatted the fly. Clara didn't plead. She didn't argue. The same strange, defiant calm that had allowed her to refuse him service now guided her actions. She nodded once at Marco, turned and walked to the staff locker room, the hushed whispers of her former colleagues following her like a ghost. The drive back to North Hollywood was a blur of traffic lights and tears she refused to let fall. The adrenaline of the confrontation had curdled into a cold, heavy dread in the pit of her stomach. She had stood up for her principles, yes, but principles didn't pay the rent. She let herself into the apartment she shared with her best friend, Mia. The small space was a study in contrast. Maya's side was neat, organized, filled with textbooks on marketing and business. Clara's side was a controlled explosion of creativity. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked against the wall. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil hung faintly in the air, and books on Helen Frankenthaler and Joan Mitchell were piled high. Maya was on the couch, laptop open. She looked up and immediately knew something was wrong. Clara, what are you doing home so early? You look like you've seen a ghost. Clara dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and finally let her shoulders slump. I got fired. Maya's laptop snapped shut. What? Why did Marco finally lose it over the way you stack the bread plates? I refused to serve a guest. Who? Alexander Sterling. Maya's eyes widened. She knew the name. Everyone in Los Angeles knew the name. Oh, Clara, what did he do? Clara recounted the entire humiliating exchange. The JBE about finger painting, the sneer about her art being a hobby for bored girls. His utter soul-crushing dismissal of her life's passion. As she spoke, the anger returned, eclipsing the fear. I couldn't just stand there and take it, Maya. She finished, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't let him do that. It felt like he was trying to erase me. Maya came over and wrapped her arms around her. You did the right thing. He's a notorious monster. Forget him. We'll figure it out. We always do. But later that night, long after Maya had gone to bed, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bravado had faded, leaving behind the stark reality. She was unemployed with less than $2,000 in her bank account. She got up and walked into the small, curtained-off corner of the living room that served as her studio. She switched on the single overhead lamp. There on the easel was her current work. It was a large canvas, a swirling vortex of deep indigos, furious violets, and a desperate, hopeful streak of brilliant gold at its center. It was about pressure, about the feeling of being crushed by expectation and circumstance, and the fight to find the light within it. It was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. It was everything. Looking at it, she felt a fresh wave of defiance. He could take her job, but he couldn't take this. This was hers. Her final thought before falling into a restless sleep was the quiet, firm sentence she had spoken to him. My art is not for sale. Miles away in a sprawling modernist mansion in the Pacific Palisades that felt more like a museum than a home. Alexander Sterling was also awake. The fury he'd felt at the restaurant had dissipated, leaving a strange and unsettling void. He stood in front of a vast glass wall, a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city. The house was silent. It had been silent for 13 months. 13 months since Elena had died. The confrontation with the waitress, Clara, he'd heard the manager call her, played over and over in his mind. It wasn't her defiance that haunted him. It was her words. My art is not for sale. He walked through the cold, minimalist halls, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble. He entered a room at the far end of the West Wing. It was the only room the decorators hadn't been allowed to touch. An art studio. It was pristine, unused. A large easel stood near the window, a blank canvas still stretched upon it. Jars of brushes stood at attention, their bristles clean. Tubes of paint were organized by color, unopened. This was the studio he had built for Elena, a surprise for their 10th anniversary. She had seen it only once a week before the aggressive cancer that had been silently growing within her finally claimed her. Elena had been a painter, not a hobbyist, but a true artist, one whose talent he'd believed would one day set the world on fire. She had that same fierce, protective glint in her eye that he'd seen in the waitress. Elena had been his light, his humanity. In the cutthroat world of finance, she was his anchor to something real, something beautiful. He remembered a conversation they'd had years ago when a wealthy associate had seen one of her early pieces and offered to buy it on the spot. Elena had politely but firmly refused. Why not? Alexander had asked her later. He was offering an absurd amount of money. She had turned to him, her eyes serious. Because he doesn't see the painting, Alex. He sees an asset, a decoration. He wants to own a piece of your world. My art is not for sale to him. It's not for sale to anyone who doesn't see its soul. My art is not for sale. The waitress's words echoed Eleanor's, a perfect ghostly reverberation across time. His cruelty to her had been a phantom cruelty, a lashing out at the memory of the passion he had lost. The girl with the smudge of blue paint on her wrist had unknowingly stood as a proxy for his late wife, and he had treated her with a viciousness born of his own bottomless grief. The realization hit him not as a wave, but as a deep, gut-wrenching ache. He wasn't a monster. He was a man hollowed out by loss, and he had poured all his pain and anger onto a stranger, a young woman who was probably just trying to pay her bills, a young woman who was also an artist. He finished his scotch in one long swallow, the liquor burning his throat. Remorse, an emotion he rarely felt in his professional life, was now consuming him. An apology wasn't enough. An apology from a man like him to a girl like her would be meaningless. Another power play. It had to be something else. Something that addressed the core of his transgression. He hadn't just insulted her. He had belittled her dream, the dream she shared with Elena. He walked back to his office, the first stirrings of a radical, audacious idea forming in his mind. He sat at his desk, pulled out his phone, and typed a message to his long-suffering executive assistant, Genevieve Albright. Genevieve, I need you to find someone. Her name is Clara Ara Evans. She was a waitress at Aurelia in Malibu. I need to know everything about her, and I mean everything. Genevieve Albright received Alexander Sterling's text at 5:15 a.m. She was already on her treadmill monitoring the Asian markets on a screen in front of her. Nothing her boss did surprised her anymore. In her 10 years as his EA, she had arranged emergency helicopter transports for a forgotten briefcase, sourced a rare species of orchid for a dinner party with 2 hours' notice, and discreetly handled the fallout from more than one of his ruthless corporate takeovers. Finding a waitress would be child's play. By 9:00 a.m., Genevieve had a complete dossier on Clara Ara Evans. It was depressingly thin, which made it all the more poignant. She'd paid a private investigator for the basics. No criminal record, no significant debt beyond student loans for a BFA from UCLA, a string of service jobs to make ends meet. Her parents were retired teachers in Oregon. She had one roommate, a marketing student named Maya Chen. But the PI hadn't found what Genevieve did. With a few expertly crafted search queries, she found Clara Ara's digital footprint. It was small, almost non-existent. A locked Facebook profile, a dormant Twitter account. But then she founded an Instagram page under the handle, Orchestre Declare Evans Art. It had only 237 followers. Genevieve clicked. She was expecting amateurish landscapes or clumsy portraits. What she found made her pause. The feed was a gallery of stunning, large-scale, abstract, expressionist paintings. They were bold and emotional, filled with a raw energy that the small phone screen could barely contain. There were no sunsets or seagulls. There was turmoil, joy, rage, and a breathtaking use of color. Genevieve, whose own tastes ran toward minimalist photography, was genuinely moved. She scrolled down, reading the captions. They weren't pretentious explanations. They were just a date or a single word. Pressure, silence, breathing. She screenshotted the entire feed and attached it to a concise email along with the PI's report. She sent it to Sterling with the subject line information on Clara Ara Evans as requested in his office overlooking Century City. Alexander opened the file. He read the PI's report in seconds, his mind cataloging the data of her life, the student debt, the low-rent apartment, the struggle. It painted a picture of a life lived on the financial edge in pursuit of a passion. Then he clicked on the link to her Instagram. He froze. The first image was the one she was currently working on the vortex of indigo and gold. He stared at it, his hand hovering over the mouse. It was as if the artist had reached into his own chest and painted the grief that had been strangling him for 13 months. It was chaotic and dark, yet that sliver of gold spoke of a desperate, resilient hope. He clicked through the rest of her work. He saw paintings that mirrored the fury he felt at the universe, and others that captured a quiet melancholy he knew all too well. Her style wasn't like Elena's. It was more aggressive, more modern. But the soul, the emotional honesty was the same. This wasn't the work of a hobbyist. This was the work of a major undiscovered talent. The shame he'd felt the night before returned tenfold. He had stood on the precipice of this incredible talent and tried to crush it with his careless words. He buzzed Genevieve on the intercom. "Get Richard Vance on the line." Richard Vans was not only Sterling Dynamics' top real estate attorney, but also Alexander's brother-in-law, Alelena's older brother. He was a pragmatic, non-nonsense man who had been watching Alexander's increasingly erratic behavior with growing concern since Alelena's death. Alex Richards' voice came through the speaker. "What's wrong?" "I want to buy the old DuPont property in the Malibu colony," Alexander said, his voice flat. There was a pause. "The beachfront villa, the one that's been in litigation for 3 years. Alex, that place is a fortress of legal problems, title issues, zoning disputes." "I'm aware," Alexander cut him off. "I want you to solve them, all of them. Today, use whatever resources you need. Pay whatever you have to. I want the title cleared and the deed in my possession by the end of the business day." "May I ask why the sudden interest in a property that's basically a lawyer's nightmare?" Richard asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. Alexander looked at the painting on his screen. "I'm giving it away." This time the silence on the other end of the line was much longer. "You're giving away a $40 million beachfront property to whom a young woman named Clara Evans," Alexander said simply. "Just get it done, Richard." He hung up before Richard could protest further. Next, he called Genevieve again. "Genevieve, I have a second task for you. It requires the utmost discretion and sensitivity." The phone call came at 2:30 p.m. Clara, Ara, and Maya were in the middle of a crisis budget meeting, which consisted of ramen noodles and Maya's laptop open to a spreadsheet that was looking increasingly grim. Clara Ara's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She usually ignored them. "You should get it," Maya said. "Could be a job offer." Clara Ara sighed and answered, putting it on speaker. "Hello. May I please speak with Clara Ara Evans?" The voice on the other end was female, crisp and impossibly professional. "This is she." "Miss Evans, my name is Genevieve Albright. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Alexander Sterling." Clara Ara's blood ran cold. She and Maya exchanged a look of pure panic. Was he going to sue her? File a complaint? What is this about?" Clara Ara stammered. "Miss Evans, Mr. Sterling wishes to extend his most profound and sincere apologies for his conduct at Aurelia Restaurant 2 nights ago." The voice continued smooth as silk. "His behavior was inexcusable, and he is deeply remorseful for the distress he caused you, including the termination of your employment." Clara Ara was speechless. An apology from him. As a tangible expression of this apology, Genevieve went on, her tone unwavering. "Mr. Sterling has instructed me to inform you that he has purchased a property in your name, specifically the beachfront villa at 247116 Pacific Coast Highway in the Malibu colony." The silence in the apartment was absolute. The only sound was the faint hiss of the speakerphone. Clara Ara and Maya stared at each other, their ramen forgotten. "I'm sorry," Clara Ara finally managed to say, thinking it was a prank. "I think I misheard you." "You heard correctly, Miss Evans. The title was cleared an hour ago, and the deed has been registered in your name. The property is yours free and clear, with all property taxes paid for the next 10 years. A car will be waiting for you at your address tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. to take you to the property should you wish to see it. A local property management firm has been engaged to hand over the keys and all relevant documentation." Maya snatched the phone. "Who is this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I can assure you this is no joke," Genevieve replied calmly. "You can have any attorney of your choosing verify the public record of the title transfer. It is all legitimate. Clara Ara, Mr. Sterling, understands that this gesture is unorthodox. He does not expect anything in return. He simply wished to rectify a wrong in a manner that he hopes will provide you with the security and space to pursue your art without limitation." Clara Ara took the phone back, her hand trembling. Why? Why would he do this? There was a slight pause on the other end. For the first time, Genevieve's voice seemed to soften, losing its corporate sheen. "Because you reminded him of something he lost," she said, almost a whisper. "And because he saw your work, the car will be there at 10 The decision to get in it is, of course, entirely yours." "Good afternoon, Miss Evans." The line went dead. Clara Ara and Maya sat in stunned silence for a full minute. Then Maya grabbed her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched the Los Angeles County public property records. A few moments later, she gasped. She turned the laptop screen towards Clara Ara. There it was in the stark, undeniable black and white of a government website. Property ID 788-24716 PCH, owner of record Evans. Clara Ara M, transfer date, current date. It was real. The waitress who had been fired for refusing to be disrespected by a billionaire was now inexplicably the owner of a beachfront villa in Malibu. The night was sleepless. Clara Ara's mind raced a whirlwind of disbelief, suspicion, and a terrifying burgeoning hope. Was this a trick? A power play of a different kind? Billionaires didn't just give away villas. Was he trying to buy her, to own her in a way far more insidious than a simple purchase of her art? It's a trap, Clara Ara said for the 10th time, pacing the small living room at 3:09 a.m. Or it's the apology of a man who has more money than sense and a guilty conscience, Maya countered, wrapped in a blanket on the couch. Think about what that woman said. He saw your work. You reminded him of something he lost. This might be less about you and more about him. It feels dirty, Clara Ara confessed, to accept something so extravagant from a man who humiliated me. Okay, look, Maya said, sitting up. Let's be strategic. Don't think of it as a gift from him. Think of it as a settlement. You suffered emotional distress and wrongful termination. He's offering compensation, except instead of a few thousand, it's a house that looks like it belongs on the cover of Architectural Digest. Mir's pragmatic lens helped, but it didn't quell the deep unease in Clara Ara's soul. This gesture was too grand, too disproportionate. It felt like an attempt to overwhelm her, to dwarf her defiance with a tidal wave of wealth. By dawn, they had a plan. Clara Ara would go. She would see the villa. She would not be intimidated, and she would not be impressed. She would treat it as an inspection, a reconnaissance mission into the bizarre world of Alexander Sterling, and Maya would come with her. At exactly 10 a.m., a black, immaculate Lincoln Navigator pulled up to their decidedly non-luxurious apartment building. A driver in a crisp suit stepped out and opened the rear door, nodding respectfully. Ms. Evans, Ms. Chen. The ride to Malibu was silent. Clara Ara stared out the window, watching as the urban sprawl of LA gave way to the sun-drenched glamour of the coast. She felt like an imposter, a stowaway in someone else's life. The Navigator turned into the Malibu Colony, a private gated community known for its celebrity residence and extreme privacy. The guard waved them through without a word. They pulled up to a set of imposing wooden gates. They slid open silently, revealing a long driveway flanked by lush, tropical foliage. And then she saw it. It wasn't a house. It was a vision. A stunning two-story structure of glass, steel, and warm teak wood. It seemed to float above the sand. It was modern but not cold, with clean lines that complemented the natural beauty of the ocean it faced. The entire back wall of the house was made of retractable glass panels, currently open, blurring the line between inside and out. The Pacific Ocean was its backyard. A woman in a sharp business suit from the property management firm was waiting for them. She gave them a professional tour, but Clara Ara barely heard her words. She walked through the rooms in a daze. The kitchen was a chef's dream of Sub-Zero and Wolf appliances. The living room was vast and airy, with minimalist furniture that was likely worth more than everything Clara Ara owned combined. There were 4 bedrooms, each with an ensuite bathroom and a private balcony overlooking the ocean. Then the woman led them to a separate structure connected to the main house by a covered glass walkway. "Mr. Sterling specifically requested that you see this space," she said, opening a set of double doors. Clara Ara stepped inside, and her breath caught in her throat. It was an art studio. It was the studio of her wildest, most unattainable dreams. It was twice the size of her entire apartment. A massive north-facing skylight bathed the room in perfect indirect natural light. One wall was solid teak for pinning up sketches. Another was reinforced for heavy canvases. There was a deep industrial sink, custom-built storage for paints and supplies. And in the center of the room, a state-of-the-art easel. The entire back wall was again glass, looking directly out at the endless expanse of the sea. This wasn't just a room. It was a statement. It was a space designed with an intimate understanding of an artist's needs. This was the part that shattered Clara Ara's cynical defenses. The house was a display of wealth. The studio was a gesture of profound understanding. Maya let out a low whistle. Okay, this is a lot. Clara Ara walked to the center of the room and placed her hand on the smooth wood of the easel. Tears she hadn't shed when she was fired now pricked at her eyes. To be able to create here with this light, this air, this freedom from worry, it was everything she had ever wanted. There is one final thing, the property manager said, pulling Clara Ara from her reverie. She handed her an iPad. Mr. Sterling has requested a meeting. He would like to speak with you here this afternoon. He asked me to let you know that if you refuse, the property remains yours regardless. There are no conditions. On the screen was a simple calendar invitation. Meeting with Alexander Sterling, 3:00 p.m. today. The catch. There it was, not a legal string, but an emotional one. He had built her the perfect gilded cage, and now he wanted to see the bird. No way, Maya whispered, reading her friend's expression. You don't have to, she said. So we take the keys. We change the locks and we hire a lawyer. Clara Ara stared out at the ocean. The waves crashed on the shore in a steady rhythmic pulse. For 2 days she had been a pawn in a game she didn't understand. First the humiliation, then this overwhelming, incomprehensible act of restitution. She couldn't live in this house, couldn't work in this studio under the shadow of the unknown. She needed to understand the why from the man himself. She needed to look him in the eye on her own territory and see if he was a manipulator, a madman, or something else entirely. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but her curiosity and the artist's instinct to understand the hidden truth of things was stronger. She looked at the property manager, her voice surprisingly steady. Tell Mr. Sterling I will see him at 3. The hours between the manager's departure and 3:00 p.m. were the longest of Clara Ara's life. She and Maya explored the villa, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous spaces. They found the closets filled with a rack of new, high-end casual wear in Clara Ara's size cashmere sweaters, linen trousers, silk blouses. A note from Genevieve Albright read, We took the liberty. Please feel free to discard if they are not to your taste. It was both thoughtful and deeply creepy. He literally bought you a new life, Maya murmured, holding up a soft gray sweater. This is insane. Clara Ara felt a growing sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie about someone else. To ground herself, she changed out of her jeans and t-shirt and into a simple black linen dress from the closet. If she was going to meet the king, she would not look like a porpa. She would look him in the eye as an equal. This was her house now, after all. At precisely 2:59 p.m., she saw him. He wasn't brought by a chauffeur in a limousine. He walked up the beach alone. He had shed the armor of his Tom Ford suit and was dressed in simple chinos and a dark polo shirt. He looked smaller, without the trappings of power, more human. But as he drew closer, she could see the same formidable intensity in his posture. He stopped at the edge of the deck, waiting for her to acknowledge him. Maya gave Clara Ara's arm a supportive squeeze and then discreetly retreated into the main house, leaving them alone in the studio. Clara Ara stood by her new easel, her arms crossed. She didn't invite him in. Ms. Evans, he began, his voice quiet, devoid of the arrogance she remembered. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I didn't have much of a choice, did I? She counted, her voice sharper than she intended. You don't exactly make it easy to say no. A flicker of something pain regret crossed his face. You're right. I apologize. That is a fault of mine. Trying to control outcomes, he gestured around the property. I imagine you have questions? I have one, she said. Why? Alexander Sterling didn't answer immediately. He looked past her at the empty easel and then out at the ocean. His gaze seemed to go distant, lost in a memory. 13 months ago, my wife Eleanor died. He said the words stark and unadorned. She was the great love of my life, my entire world, and she was a painter. Clara Ara's defensive posture softened almost imperceptibly. This was not the opening she had expected. The night at the restaurant, he continued, finally meeting her eyes. I was not in a good place. I have been in a state of perpetual rage and grief since she passed, and I've become a person she would not have recognized. When I made that comment about your art, about it being a hobby, I wasn't speaking to you. He took a hesitant step onto the deck as if testing the ground. Years ago, a business associate of mine made a similar remark to Eleanor about her work. He dismissed it, patronized her. She handled it with a grace I could never possess. But what you said, my art is not for sale, it was almost verbatim what she told him that day. When you stood up to me with that smudge of paint on your wrist and fire in your eyes for a split second, I saw her and I lashed out at you as if I were lashing out at the ghost of her memory. He looked utterly broken. The billionaire titan was gone, replaced by a grieving husband. It was monstrous, he said. What I did to you was cruel and unforgeless. I cost you your job. I humiliated you, and I attacked the most sacred part of you, your creativity. When I discovered your work online the next day, I was humbled. Your talent is immense, and I realized I had committed a terrible sin. I had tried to extinguish a light, the very same kind of light that I miss every single day. He finally walked into the studio, his presence filling the space. He stopped a few feet from her. I can't bring Eleanor back, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't undo the pain I live with, but I could try in my own clumsy, excessive way to undo the damage I did to you. I didn't buy you this house to own you, Clara. I bought it to give you freedom, the freedom to create without worrying about rent or bills. The freedom that Eleanor was just beginning to have before she was taken. This isn't a cage, it's an apology. Clara was silent, processing his confession. The story was so personal, so painful that it had the undeniable ring of truth. Her anger began to dissolve, replaced by a complex wave of empathy and confusion. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, he said, but I do have one thing to ask of you. A request, not a demand. The house is yours either way. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He swiped to a photo and held it out to her. It was a candid shot of a woman with a vibrant, laughing face and kind eyes, her hair tied up messily, a dab of green paint on her cheek. She was standing in front of an unfinished canvas, looking at the camera with a look of pure joy. It was Eleanor. I would like to commission you professionally, Alexander said. I want you to paint a portrait, not of her, but of her spirit, of her light. I want you to spend some time here in this space and create a piece that captures the essence of what we've discussed. Joy, passion, resilience, the soul of an artist. I will pay you any fee you name. Clara looked from the photograph of the smiling woman to the face of the grieving man in front of her. The entire bizarre, terrifying episode finally clicked into place. This wasn't about a waitress and a billionaire. It was about a husband's desperate act of penance. It was about art's power to echo through lives. Before she could answer, a sharp, disapproving voice cut through the air. Alexander, what is the meaning of this circus? Both of them turned. Standing in the walkway from the main house was an older man in a perfectly tailored suit, his face a mask of stern disapproval. Clara recognized him from a quick Google search. Maya had done Richard Vance, Eleanor's brother. Richard Vance strode into the studio, his eyes sweeping over the scene with the cold appraisal of a litigator. He looked at Clara, then at his brother-in-law, and his expression hardened. I just got off the phone with the family trust, Richard said, his voice tight with controlled anger. They are, to put it mildly, questioning your soundness of mind, gifting a $40 million asset to a stranger. He gave Clara a dismissive up-and-down glance that made her skin crawl. This is a private matter, Richard, Alexander said, his tone turning steely. It stopped being a private matter when you started liquidating assets tied to Eleanor's estate, Richard shot back. I warned you this would happen. Your grief is making you reckless. And you? He turned his full venomous attention to Clara. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, young lady, but it's over. You are a classic opportunist. You saw a grieving, vulnerable man, and you played him like a fiddle. That is not what happened, Clara said, her voice shaking slightly, but her resolve hardening. This man's condescension was a pale imitation of Sterling's, but it was just as infuriating. Oh, really? Richard sneered. A waitress gets fed, and the next day she's the owner of a Malibu villa. It's the oldest story in the book. You will find that the Sterling family is not so easily manipulated. Our lawyers will fight this. We will paint you as a predator, a gold digger who preserved. You will not see a dime." "Enough," Alexander roared. The command was so powerful, so absolute that it physically startled both Clara and Richard. The grieving husband vanished, and the titan of industry was back. But this time, his power was aimed not at her, but in her defense. "You will not speak to her that way," Alexander said, stepping between Clara and his brother-in-law. "This young woman did nothing but show integrity in the face of my own boorish behavior. She asked for nothing. She manipulated no one. This was my decision, mine alone. And as for Elena's estate, this property was purchased with my personal funds, and you know it." He took a step closer to Richard, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "For a year, you and the family have been watching me, whispering, waiting for me to get over it. You've tried to manage my grief like a corporate asset. You want to protect Elena's memory. Eleanor would have been horrified by what I did, and she would have admired what Clara did. This action, this circus as you call it, is the first thing I've done in 13 months that feels true to the man Elena loved. So you will back down. You will call off your lawyers, or you will be dealing with me not as your brother-in-law but as your adversary, and you know how that ends." Richard palled. He had seen Alexander Sterling in adversary mode. It was a corporate bloodbath. He looked from Alexander's unyielding face to Clara's defiant one. He had lost. With a final withering glare at Clara, he turned on his heel and stormed out. The silence he left behind was heavy. Alexander turned back to Clara, his chest rising and falling. The anger slowly subsided, leaving him looking exhausted, but also for the first time at peace. "I apologize for that," he said. "He means well, but his grief expresses itself as control." Clara finally found her voice. She looked at the easel at the ocean, at the incredible, impossible opportunity that had been born from a moment of defiance. She was not the person she was 3 days ago. She was not a victim, not a damsel, and certainly not an opportunist. She was an artist. "I will accept your commission, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and strong. His face registered surprise and then relief. "But I have terms," she continued. He nodded. "Of course, the villa," she said, gesturing around her. "This is an extraordinary gift. I accept it, not as a settlement, but as the apology you intended it to be. Thank you." She took a deep breath. "But the art is separate. This is not a favor. It will be a professional contract. We will agree on a fee, a reasonable one, based on market rates for a painter of my standing, not your net worth. The contract will specify deliverables, timelines, and your usage rights for the final piece. I will not be your pet project or your charity case. I will be your commissioned artist." She held out her hand. "If we are to do this, we do it as professionals." A slow smile spread across Alexander Sterling's face. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his severe features. It reached his eyes, which crinkled at the corners. He was looking at her with profound respect. He took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "On your terms, Miss Evans. On your terms. Genevieve will draw up the contract tomorrow." He let go of her hand and walked to the edge of the studio, turning to leave. "The studio is already stocked with basic supplies," he said. "Anything else you need? Just send a list to Genevieve. Take your time. Create something that matters." He paused for a moment. "And Clara, thank you." Then he turned and walked away down the beach, his silhouette shrinking against the vastness of the setting sun. Clara stood alone in her studio. Her studio. The words tasted foreign and magical. The evening light, golden and soft, poured in through the skylight, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She looked at the blank canvas on the easel, then out at the ocean, its waves whispering on the shore. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something far more complex and real. It was a story of how a moment of gut-wrenching cruelty born from grief could be met with an act of unshakable integrity. It was the story of two broken people from different worlds who, through a bizarre and dramatic series of events, had inadvertently offered each other a path to healing. She walked over to her new pristine set of paints. She unscrewed the cap from a tube of brilliant, hopeful gold and squeezed a generous amount onto her palette. Then she picked up a brush, faced the canvas, and began to paint. So what is this story really about? Is it a Cinderella story for the modern age? Or is it something more? Clara Evans wasn't saved by a billionaire. She was given an opportunity because she refused to be silenced. Her integrity, her fierce protection of her own soul, and her art was the true catalyst for change. Alexander Sterling's grand gesture wasn't about buying forgiveness. It was a desperate human attempt to honor a memory and right a profound wrong. It proves that sometimes the most unexpected connections arise from our worst moments. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Would you have accepted the villa? Would you have met with him? We all face moments where we have to choose between our principles and our comfort. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes standing your ground, even when it costs you everything, can lead you to a destiny you never could have imagined. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of strength and surprising second chances. And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will make you think and feel. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.